Hello everybody out there, and welcome to Think Outside the Board. If it's your first time here. If it's not, then welcome back. Today I'm shooting a video for a Kickstarter update. I do these twice a month, and they're kind of designed to be used together with my website, which is thinkoutsidetheboard.com. And at that website, I publish updates every day that summarize the Kickstarters from the previous day. Or on a Monday, they summarize the Kickstarters from the previous Friday and over the weekend. So you can use that website every day just to see what's new on Kickstarter. It's designed to be a way to quickly cut through the glut of Kickstarter, so you don't have to spend your time poring over Kickstarter. It'll just give you all of the relevant campaigns, and boom, just in a glance. I also have links on them, so if you see something you like, you can just click on the link and it'll pop you over to the campaign. And then twice a month I do these videos, and these videos are my way of highlighting what I think are the best Kickstarters out there. Each video, I focus on games that are being crowdfunded that are going to complete their funding over a half of the month. So this month we're doing the second half of July, the late July Kickstarter update, and it's going to include projects that are funding from July 16th through July 31st. Also, I usually include sections in this video where I talk about the campaigns that I personally backed from the previous video, as well as games that I've acquired into my collection in that time. Kickstarter's kind of slowed down over the last month or two because of, I think mainly because of the shipping issues that are happening globally. Not just with board gaming, but across multiple industries. Still, I've had, I don't know how many Kickstarters that were supposed to have come in over the last couple months, and everything's just getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. It's giving me a little more of a chance to kind of catch up on various work items, so it's not bad. But if anyone's sitting there waiting for a Kickstarter to come in, I know it's taking longer than you may have anticipated. Meanwhile, publishers are going out of their minds right now trying to deal with this situation. And I think what that has amounted to is that there just are a lot fewer Kickstarters coming out right now, as publishers are kind of playing a wait and see game with shipping and what's going to happen over the next few months. I think what will eventually happen is the situation will resolve itself, shipping will catch up, it'll get back on track, but as often happens in situations like this, I think those shipping prices are going to go up permanently, and they will eventually be passed over to the consumer. So I think what we're ultimately looking at is, 6 months, a year from now, you're going to see shipping prices raised $5 to $15 above what they were previously. I think that's going to be the end result. It's created this situation right now where a lot of Kickstarters are coming in very late, and I have a lot of pre-orders out for retail games, and those are delayed too. So there's just a backup with everything right now. So that means that the only two sections I will actually have in this video this month are the recommended Kickstarter campaigns and then the games that I've played. So let's just get moving, and we'll get through these two sections and blow through this video a lot faster than normal. So there are 5 games that I'm going to be featuring, 5 campaigns that will be completing their funding between July 16th and July 31st. And the first of those is Forests of Pangaia. Now, this is going to complete funding on July 16th. The minimum funding that they'd set up for this campaign was $24,000. They're currently sitting at $387,000, which is 16.5 times what they were asking for. So they're doing very, very well, particularly when you take into account what I'm about to tell you about the game, which is that it is designed by Thomas Franken, and the art is by a team of 4 artists: Marcel Domke, Chris Karbach, Anna Mescanova, and Florian Moncomble. Now, all of those artists and the designer, this is their first published game. Except for one, the last artist, Florian Moncomble. He previously worked on a game called Incredible Expeditions: Quest for Atlantis. And then the publisher is called Pangaia Games, and obviously they have been formed for this game. Now, what all that means is that the designer and 3/4 of the art team and the publisher, this is a first-time thing for all of them. So the fact that they have funded right now at 16.5 times their minimum requested funding is a pretty amazing task. Now, if we look a little bit closer at the game, this is intended for 2 to 4 players. It's a medium-light game in complexity, and we're going to call the risk on this one high. And the reason that it's high is because it is a first-time designer, first-time artist, and a first-time publisher. This is also the first time they've run a Kickstarter, so there are just a lot of unknown variables, ways for things to go wrong. Now, the game itself looks a lot like photosynthesis. So you're going to be placing trees out, you're using the trees to spawn seeds, and then those seeds can grow into other trees. The difference here is that you're not worried about the sun or the shadows that the trees are casting. That's not a part of this game. This is more purely an area control game. So you're going to be using your trees to plant seeds, and then depending on what other players' seeds are there and how players spend resources will determine how the trees grow in future turns. Also, players only have access to one seed at the beginning of the game, and the rest of the seeds they'll gain access to by unlocking them on their player board. So photosynthesis feels more like an abstract game, whereas this game feels more like a Euro with kind of abstract elements, but there is this kind of Euro sensibility to it and unlockable player actions. So while it does involve some of these mechanisms, it's done in a very light, appealing, user-friendly way. And the components for it that we've seen so far throughout the campaign with the trees, they're just this very appealingly constructed wooden pieces. They have a nice color to them. They look very attractive to play with and tactile and fun to touch. So the mechanisms in this game are mainly area majority influence and set collection. And as I said, the physical components in this game are very nice and appealing. Everything about that campaign has been very, very well put together. Yet because it is a first-time publisher, it feels a little different than other games. The components are nice and they're tactile and they're colorful, but they seem to be constructed in a way that sets them apart from other games. Now, if you pledge $59 on this one, you're going to get the standard edition of the game. And if you pledge $65, you'll get the deluxe edition. Now, what that means in this game is that you'll get dual layered player boards, and you'll get 80 tokens that are wooden tokens for resources and for the life tokens. So those will be upgrades from the standard game. I'm assuming in the standard game, they're just cardboard. Now, when I talk about those pledge levels, I'm not including shipping. So if you're interested in the game, you can click on the link and it'll take you to the campaign page. And you can check and see what the shipping is for your specific country. Or if you're in the United States, which part of the United States, because I'm sure as you all know, there are different shipping prices for the contiguous 48 states and Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. So they're looking to deliver this game in March 2022. That's what they're aiming for. We'll see what happens with shipping in the meantime, but that is currently the anticipated delivery date. And I think this game is really going to be for medium-light gamers who like tactile pieces, a nature element, and just fun, engaging, easy-breezy gameplay. The second game on our list is Platformer, and this one is not on Kickstarter, it's on Gamefound. It's going to complete funding on July 17th. The minimum requested funding for this one was $18,000. They're currently sitting at $29,000, so that's about 1.5 times their funding goal. Now, it's designed by Artur Lutinsky and Lukas Lauderchek. It's Artur Lutinsky's first published game, whereas Lukas Lauderchek has worked on Flick of Faith and The Great Wall. And the artists on Platformer are Kristen Piasek, who previously worked on Flick of Faith, and Waclaw Wysocki, who worked on a game called Mistborn House War. Now, this is getting published by Awaken Realms Light, which is sort of a cousin company of Awaken Realm. And Awaken Realms I'm sure you've heard of. They've published games like Etherfields, Lords of Hellas, Nemesis, Tainted Grail, and This War of Mine. Awaken Realms Light hasn't had as big hits, but they do have that relationship with their cousin company to help them with funding. So Light has published Bees the Secret Kingdom, Flick of Faith, and Siege Storm Siege Mode. So Platformer is a game for 2 to 4 players. It's got a medium-light complexity to it, and I'd put the risk on this one at medium-low because Awaken Realms is huge, they've got a lot of money, they've had some hugely successful crowdfunding campaigns, and in fact, Gamefound, the crowdfunding platform that the campaign is running on, is Awaken Realms' campaign platform. They literally created it as a competitor for Kickstarter. So even though this one isn't as well funded as some of their bigger games through their parent company, it's still doing well enough to fund, and there shouldn't be any problems with it. So this is an interesting looking game. It's a fighting game. It's a fighting miniatures game, kind of a skirmish game. It's being billed as a dungeon crawler. But it's also got this theme that's based on 80s and 90s video games, platformers of the time. And as you're fighting, skirmishing with the other players and their miniatures, you're going to be using a mechanic in the game called the gravity mechanic, which will allow you to jump on different platforms and do different things. And it's all about how you can get really high up in your turn and kind of make that work for you, and then what happens on your way down. So it's this interesting kind of hybrid dungeon crawler, skirmishing miniatures mashup with this interesting platformer video game theme to it. Now the pledging on this one is very simple. It's just a $52 single pledge. Plus shipping, but $52. And that's it. You're going to get everything. Unlike Awaken Realms big projects or Simon's campaigns or things like that, there's not a million add-ons or a bunch of different pledge levels. It's just that $52 single pledge. There are a couple of add-ons. For $6, you can get an additional dice set. And for $20, you can get the deluxe token set. But that's it. So you probably don't need the additional dice set unless you plan on playing on a big table. You want to have an extra dice so that people can kind of reach it wherever they are. But if you want to bling the thing out, throw in the $20 deluxe token kit, and that'll bring your grand total to $72 plus shipping. But that's it. There aren't a lot of expansions for this one, so you'll be able to get in on an all-in for a relatively decent price. Even if you get the add-ons and with shipping, the whole thing should still come in under $100. And Platformer is also aiming to deliver in March 2022. Our third game this period is called Villagers Shifting Sands, and this one's going to fund on July 22nd. Now, they had a minimum funding goal of $35,000. They're currently at $273,000, so about 8 times their requested funding. And this is kind of a one-man act. So this game is designed and illustrated by Hakan Gardner. So he's designed and illustrated Shifting Sands, which is the expansion, and he also did the same on the base game, so it's his entire baby. And it's being published by Sinister Fish Games, who published his previous games, Villagers and Streets. So as both a designer and an artist, Hakan Gardner's previous games are Streets and Villagers, the original base game. And it's being published by Sinister Fish Games. That is a company that was started by Dave Clark, who I think originally wanted to be a designer, and he designed a game called Great Scott, so they published that. But since the publication of that, they've focused on Hakan Gardner's games, and they've published Streets and Villagers, and they've done really well with those. So the expansion that we're talking about, Shifting Seasons, it is for 1 to 5 players, the same as the original base game. It's a medium-light game, and I'd put the risk on this one at medium-high. So Sinister Fish Games has run a few very successful Kickstarter campaigns, including the ones for Streets and the original Villagers. But that's really all they've done, is just those 2 campaigns. So they've got their feet wet, but they still only delivered a couple big campaigns. Now this game is a very light tableau builder. You're going to be recruiting and drafting cards, collecting a bunch of villagers who will get you access to other villagers and resources, and it's just all being done to generate kind of chains and points at the end of the game. So it's a card game. It's got card drafting in it and set collection. And again, this is an expansion for the base game, so you also will need villagers to play Villagers Shifting Seasons. Now there's a few different pledge levels on this one. For $18, you're going to get Shifting Seasons, just the expansion. So you only want to be pledging that if you already have the base game or if you have a way to buy it on your own. For $54, there's a gameplay bundle, and that's going to add in the base game, the original Kickstarter expansion pack, and the promo cards. And then there's a pledge level for $123 called Everything Ever, on top of the base game and the promos and stuff. It's going to add in a playmat, sleeves, and a coin chest. And the coin chest is a magnetic box, and the coins in it are wooden coins. So it's not metal coins, they're wooden coins. And Villagers Shifting Seasons is aiming to deliver in February 2022. Following that, and funding on July 27th, is Epic Spell Wars of the Battle Wizards Annihilageddon 2. So the minimum requested funding on this one is $10,000. They're currently edging over $200,000, so that's 20 times their minimum requested funding. There are 3 designers on this one. There's Matt Dunn, who previously worked on some very similar deck builders. He worked on the Cartoon Network crossover Crisis animation Annihilation deck building game, which really kind of feels like a dry run for this game. He also worked on the DC deck building game Dark Knight's Metal, and the previous game in this series, Epic Spell Wars of the Battle Wizards Annihilageddon. So this is kind of a standalone sequel to that game. So the next designer on this is Matt Hyra. And he previously worked on the DC Comics deck building game, DC Comics Deck Building Forever Evil, and GKR Heavy Hitters. And then the last designer is Corey Jones. He worked on Epic Spell War of the Battle Wizards, Duel at Mount Skullsfire, Epic Spell Wars of the Battle Wizards, Rumble at Castle Tentakill, and the World of Warcraft card trading game. And this game is illustrated by R.S. Bixby, so if you like the previous games, then you should like that because he has illustrated all of them. Notably, Epic Spell Wars of the Battle Wizards, Annihilageddon deck building game, so the first game in this actual deck building series, Epic Spell Wars of the Battle Wizards, Melee at Murder Shroom Marsh, and Epic Spell War of the Battle Wizards, Panic at the Pleasure Palace. And finally, this game is published by Cryptozoic Entertainment, and they're best known for the DC Comics deck building game, Love Letter Batman, and Spyfall. And the story behind this IP is that there were a series of these Epic Spell Wars of the Battle Wizards games. They were card drafting games where you were looking to create a chain of 3 cards to develop a really powerful attack. And there were several versions of this made, I think about half a dozen. And then someone got the brilliant idea to take the IP and kind of make it into a deck building game. And the first one was very popular, and so this one is being made by pretty much the same people. So this game, like its predecessor, is for 1 to 4 players. It's a medium light game, so it's a deck builder, but it's very thematic, it's got cool art, and complexity-wise, it's on the medium light side. And then the risk for this one is going to be medium high. So Cryptozoic has published a few pretty well-known games. I think people have heard of Love Letter Batman, but that was actually sub-licensed off of the original Love Letter game, and Spyfall has done really well for them. But they're actually a smaller company, and they haven't had a ton of big Kickstarters. They've done it enough that I think they know what they're doing and they're not a high risk, but they still remain the smaller company that's operating on a smaller level and hasn't produced a ton of big Kickstarters. Now, the mechanics in this one, obviously it's a deck building game, so it's a deck builder, and it features hand management and then a lot of take that. So the take that is kind of the main element that's coming over from the original game. It's very combative. I mean, it's an epic spell war. What do you expect? So there's 3 different pledge levels on this one. For $40, you can pledge at the wizard level, and that's just going to get you the standalone sequel. For $65, you can pledge at something called the Wicked Warlock level, and that will add on a Kickstarter exclusive expansion. It's called the Gangbangers expansion, and it's an expansion specifically for this standalone sequel. And then for $110, you can pledge at the Studley Spellslinger level, which will add on power chips, a trophy, which is this metal statue that can be used as a bowl for the power chips, a token sack, and a playmat. And Epic Spell Wars of the Battle Wizards Annihilageddon 2 is looking to deliver in March 22 as well. And that brings us to our last game of this section, and it's called Distilled. Distilled is going to fund on July 29th. They had a funding goal of $18,000. They're currently sitting at $258,000, so they're pushing past about 14.5 times their minimum requested funding. Now, this game is designed by Dave Beck. It's also published by Paverson Games, which is Dave Beck's company. And he's a first-time designer, and it's a first-time publisher. The art is being handled by an artist named Eric Evanson, and he only has one published game. It's called Marrying Mr. Darcy, which sounds like a pretty cool game just from the name alone. Anyway, this game is for 1 to 5 players. The complexity seems to be medium heavy. And unfortunately, the risk for this one is going to be high because we're dealing with a first-time designer and a first-time publisher and the first time they've done a Kickstarter. But I will say it looks great. You know, you see all kinds of creators at all kinds of levels using Kickstarter. Some of them are just scams. And some of them you can tell from the campaign itself that the creators haven't really gotten their act together and it's not very professional. Distilled looks fantastic. The fact that it's being done by a team, it's their first campaign, it's a first-time designer, it's really, really impressive. And so I think these are the kind of games where if you have a little extra cash and you love board gaming, this is the kind of game that I think you really want to try to back to encourage new creators and new publishers who are doing really good work to stay in the industry and help them succeed. And I mean, right now with everything that's happening with shipping prices, it's becoming even more important. So if you want to help a new creator and you want to help this industry, this is a great game to back. And I think of all the games that I'm talking about today, this is probably the one that I will most likely back. The other 2 I'm kind of considering are Villager Shifting Seasons and Epic Spell Wars. but this is the one that I probably will end up backing. So this is basically a card game, although it's a very, very Euro-y card game. And it's going to have a huge footprint on the table, so there's kind of a lot of tableau going on. But it's basically a card game. And it's got hand management, push your luck, set collection, and just a lot of really kind of cool Euro mechanics. Like one of them is when you're creating drinks, because it's called Distilled, so you're working in a distillery, you're creating drinks. And when you make a drink, you take your front and back cards and you discard them, and that'll be used in the next batch. And that's something that happens in distilleries where they get rid of the beginning and the end of the batch because it's kind of impure, so they'll take it out and then they'll use it in the next batch. So they're really kind of cool little thematic things like that in this game, and I love it when Euros do that. When the mechanics reflect the themes in playful ways, and it makes gameplay a little more intuitive the more you play it. I mean, that's something that's very attractive to me as a gamer. So there's two different pledge levels on this one. For $55, you can pledge at the original blend level, which will get you the base game. And then for $85, you can pledge the signature blend level, and that's going to add in the Africa and Middle East expansion, as well as metal coins and a commemorative coaster set. There are some pledge levels higher than that, but they're for retailers and they're for multiple copies, and I tend to not include pledge levels that just feature a ton of copies. And like a lot of the other games that we're talking about today, this one is aiming to deliver in March 2022. So that wraps up the currently running Kickstarters that I'm profiling for this video. As I mentioned at the top, I don't have any games that I pledged from the last period, and I don't have any games that I've acquired because all of the Kickstarters that I've backed are backed up on delivery, and even a few retail games that I've pre-ordered, those are waiting on delivery as well. So we're just going to jump right ahead to the played games section. And there's 5 games in this section this period. The first is Among the Stars. So Among the Stars is a card drafting and tile placement game. It's one of those games kind of like Seven Wonders where you're going to have a certain number of cards, you're going to pick one to play, and you're going to pass the rest to your neighbor. And then you will get a hand of cards passed to you from your neighbor. And that'll go around until everybody's played a certain number of cards, and then the round ends. So what players are doing in Among the Stars is using these cards to create a tableau which represents a space station. And there are a lot of scoring rules. Some of the cards will score points right as you place them. Others will score at the end of the game. So you'll be kind of picking between those two types of cards as you're playing them. Some cards need to be near a reactor. Reactors come loaded with 2 little cubes, and some cards may need those cubes to be constructed. If that's the case, generally those cards need to be within 2 spaces of the reactor when the reactor still has cubes left on it. So you're creating this tableau with different puzzles in it and different scoring conditions. And as the game goes on and you create more and more scoring conditions, that will then determine what you need to do and how you need to play cards to maximize the scoring of points. And I mean, it's an okay game. It's a solid game. The design behind Among the Stars is good. The problem is it was published 10 years ago in 2011, and it feels old. It feels like a generation or generations old game. It feels at least as old as a 2011 game. So Kristen and I played it once, and we just played the base game, and as I said, it's fine. It's okay. But the thing is, because there's been so many games since then that have done similar things and done it better, that playing Among the Stars just feels very sort of unfulfilling and inconsequential. And I mean, the components for her are fine, but in the last 10 years, with all of this Kickstarter bling and some of the amazing components that even retail games are putting out, this just feels like some cardboard pieces and some cards in a box. It's nothing sexy about it. It's not shiny. It's not really appealing. It plays solidly, but it just feels old and kind of rote. So we played a game of Among the Stars. The reason is that when I first started getting into board games more heavily several years ago, I met this guy down in Orange County in Southern California who was selling a bunch of games. One of the games that I bought off of him was Eclipse with several expansions. Another one was Among the Stars with 2 expansions. And so one of those expansions was The Ambassadors, and the second one was Expanding the Alliance. Now, Expanding the Alliance we haven't played with yet. it essentially gives you components and player colors so that you can play Among the Stars with 6 players instead of just with 4. And it kind of gives you more of everything. So if you're playing it a lot, that will give you a lot of stuff that you can throw into the game, and it will give you more variability if the game's starting to go stale, if it's starting to get old. And it will give you that 5 to 6 player expansion. But it doesn't really change the game much. It's just more of the same thing. So we haven't played with expanding the alliance, and I don't think I'm going to. The first game that we played with, we just played the base game, and we thought it was okay. But because there are so many better tableau builders that have come along since then, I mean, I'd rather just play Everdell, or even Wingspan, or even Imperial Settlers, which itself is an old game now. I mean, Imperial Settlers even has a sort of new spin-off version of the IP called Empires of the North, and I haven't even played that game yet. But Imperial Settlers feels kind of like a last generation game. It feels old. But I still like Imperial Settlers, and I think it still has better game decisions, a little more complex game decisions than Among the Stars. So while they're still both solid, if I was going to play one tableau builder that feels 10 years or more old, it would probably be Imperial Settlers. But I'd rather just play a newer game that has better components and more going on in the design. So I've been feeling like I'm going to get rid of Among the Stars, but I just wanted to play it with Kristen to make sure of that and to see what she thought about it. So yeah, we both thought the base game was okay, but we were pretty nonplussed by it, and we don't think that it really deserves to stay in the collection. With all the games that I have kind of coming in and out to do videos with, and games that I really love, and games that Kristen loves, it just doesn't make sense to keep a game that we think is okay, mediocre. So we played a second time, and this time we threw in the Ambassadors. So we played Among the Stars with the Ambassadors. And the Ambassadors expansion adds in some goal cards, and these cards called the Ambassadors. And you can purchase those Ambassador cards on your turn by discarding a card instead of playing the card that you've selected. Normally in the game, as the turns are going around, every time it comes to you, you're going to pick a card. You then either build that card on your space station, or you discard it to take 3 money, or to build a reactor with 2 reactor cubes on it. But if you're playing with the Ambassadors expansion, you can also discard a card and pay whatever the Ambassadors cost. There'll be 3 out at any one time, and then you can recruit that ambassador into your space station, and they give you sometimes an immediate kind of scoring bonus or an ongoing condition, sometimes endgame bonuses, but they just add more variability to the game, and another mini mechanic that gives the game a little more breadth, a little more life, a little more replayability. And I think that for me, if I'm going to play Among the Stars, I want to play it with the Ambassadors. I think not even having those goal cards and the Ambassadors in the game makes it not really worth playing. I mean, I still wouldn't turn down a game of Among the Stars, but I would definitely prefer to play with the Ambassadors. And in either case, I don't think it's something that I would bring out to the table or that I would suggest. So we played Among the Stars, and then we played Among the Stars with the Ambassadors. And we thought both games were okay. I like the Ambassadors a little bit better. I think my fiance may have actually liked the base game a little bit better. But we're not going to keep it. We're going to get rid of the whole thing and move on to other better games. So this period, I also played Chronicles of Crime 1400. Kristen and I have slowly been playing through the 5 scenarios in the game. That's a tutorial scenario and then 4 cases. And we have now finished the final case. We did very poorly. She doesn't really want to replay any of the cases though, so I'm going to be replaying the cases on my own just to dot my I's, cross my T's, and get every little bit of crime solving and mystery solving out of it that I can. Now, I have already done that with the tutorial. There was nothing really to replay in the tutorial and the first scenario, and I don't think there was anything to replay in that scenario either. But I did go through and replay them. They're very easy to solve. So for 1400, I still have 3 cases left that I'm going to go through. I'm going to play them a couple more times until I've solved everything. And then I may do a full teach and review on Chronicles of Crime 1400. I will say, though, that it is a crime-solving game, sort of a mystery game in which you're using an app, and there's a certain number of cases, and the cases have certain mysteries with set solutions. So once you play it, once you solve it, there's no replay value for you. And based on my experience with the game and the cases, I think the intro cases you'll be able to completely solve the first time out. The last case may take you up to half a dozen plays to solve everything in it, depending on if you want to go back and do all of that. So if we just average it at, let's say, 3 plays per case, maybe an hour, hour and a half per play. That's, let's say, 3 to 4 hours per case times 4 or 5 cases. We're looking at about 15 or 20 hours of gameplay for that game. And I think if you like that kind of game and you're okay with the limited replayability and the kind of disposable nature of the game, then this is a really good game. It's one of the best written, best designed mystery games out there. And it's got really good art too, very attractive card art, and the components, everything about it is just very, very well done. So short of me posting a full teach and review for Chronicles of Crime 1400, just know that it's really, really good. If you like what it is, I definitely would recommend it. Now, we've also started to play Chronicles of Crime 1900, which is the sequel. And I backed the Kickstarter that had 1400, 1900, 2400, and Chronicles of Crime all together. But these games are app-based. So even though the physical components were all shipped out at the end of 2020, people who backed the Kickstarter like me are having to wait for the app side to be completed for each of the games. And so 1900 finally came out a few weeks ago. I think they're slowly rolling out all of the scenarios. So there may be 1 or 2 at the end that are not out yet. Or maybe they weren't out when it released, but they're out now. So I'm making my way through it. And Kristen and I have played, I think, just the first tutorial case for that so far. So I will say, if you've played 1400, the only thing that's really different with 1900 is that there's no dog. So that's kind of sad. The dog was really fun in 1400. And he was also a great source of humor. And you could always use him to smell an item like clothing or something. And then he might send you on a chase and lead you to where, the person that used the object or wore the object is. So there's no dog in 1900. Also, instead of going back to your house with your brothers and sisters, like in 1400, I think you had a monk brother, an art dealer sister, and another brother who was a spy, and you could go to for information about court members and kind of political figures. So instead of having that, in this game, you now have a newspaper office that you go back to, and there's a couple people in there that you can interact with if you want a little help. Now, 1400 kind of felt like you were solving crimes in the era of an Assassin's Creed game, whereas 1900 is set more in like Victorian England. And then 2400, which will have the app components come out by the end of this year, the end of 2021. That's the one that kind of looks the coolest to me. It's set in the future in 2400, and it's kind of cyberpunky. And I'm sure there'll be like 1 or 2 little mechanical changes going over to that iteration to keep it a little fresh. So I do like the change of scenery from 1400 to 1900. I haven't really decided which one I like yet. I need to play 1900 more. But after playing 1400 a bunch, it's just nice to move on to a different theme. And it mainly works the same way. You're still using cards. You don't have the vision cards that you had in 1400, which were these dreams that you had that you would have access to several cards that had people that were involved in the case. And so those cards would give you clues as to events and things that had happened and kind of help you put together the actions of the case. Instead, in 1900, you have some cards that you get that actually have physical puzzles that you play. And while I liked those vision cards in 1400, the puzzle cards in 1900 are more interactive. And we've only played the tutorial, and there was only sort of one of these puzzle cards that we dealt with. And it was very easy because it was the tutorial. So I don't really know how to judge those puzzle cards yet, but I like the idea of them. And I think as the cases move on and those puzzles get a little bit more challenging, I think I'll probably prefer them to the vision cards. But all in all, just know that I really like both games, and they're so similar. They have a lot of the same writers and designers working on them, so that if you know 1400 and you like it, I think it's a safe bet that you're really going to like 1900. It's basically more of the same thing with just a few little changes to mix things up and help keep it fresh. So I'm looking forward in the next couple weeks to finish playing 1900 as well with my fiance, and then kind of working through those cases on my own solo just to cross those I's and dot those T's. It's very likely that you'll see a first impressions video from me next week for Chronicles of Crime 1900 as well. And then finally this period I played Kanban EV, which is a Vital Lacerda game. Vital Lacerda is my favorite designer of all time, at least in terms of designers working alone. I'm also a huge fan of the Mind Clash team, which at its sort of core level is Richard Amon and Victor Peter, and they've done games like Tricarion and Anachrony and Cerebria. So I like those guys a lot. But in terms of one person working alone, my favorite designer is Vital Lacerda, and he's designed my favorite game of all time, which is Lisboa. And I can already say that Kanban EV is going to go into either the second or third slot in my favorite Lacerda games following Lisboa, and I think for now tied with On Mars. So for now, for me, it's going to be Lisboa, then On Mars and Kanban EV, and then underneath that, I think CO2 Second Chance, and then underneath that, probably the Gallerist, and then probably Venus Deluxe. And then from there, I think we take a jump down to Escape Plan, which isn't quite as good as his others, but I still really like it. And then we take a bigger jump down to Railways of Portugal, which is an expansion he did for Railways of the World that I think was somewhat based on a map he did several years back for Age of Steam. So he just kind of updated it, I think, into a map for Railways of the World. And I like Railways of the World. Railways of Portugal, though, I think is a little more fiddly, and I'd rather just play with other boards, I think. And then, in my opinion, his worst game is Mercado de Lisboa, which I would pretty much warn people against. And then finally, he designed Dragon Keepers with his daughter. It's a very, very light, I think, set collection game, and I haven't played it. And I don't think, I mean, it's certainly not the same kind of game as his really heavy worker placement games. Anyway, in Kanban EV, players are working in an auto factory, and they're trying to produce cars and designs, and they're competing against each other. And they also have the factory boss, Sandra, to contend with. The variant that has now become the main game is Mean Sandra, which means as you're getting certified in different departments, which she will do every turn, whoever's lowest on the certification track, if they haven't fulfilled certain quotas, will be penalized fairly significantly. So that happens during the game. And then players will be doing worker placement spaces that will allow them to do things like collect car designs, get car parts, use car parts to push out cars off of the assembly line into the R&D track. And then they'll be able to go over to the R&D track and use their designs and their car parts to upgrade designs and to purchase cars. And then there's a fairly robust player board system where you're going to be storing designs, upgrading designs, storing cars, and dealing with additional tokens like parts voucher tokens, which will allow you to claim just any parts that you want. Also books, which will allow you to do extra training off the books. There's also banked shifts, which will allow you to work longer than the shifts that are given to you by the normal worker placement spaces. There's just a lot going on, but it's like every other Vital Lacerda game, which it's not as heavy as it looks. And once you understand the game thematically and you play it once or twice and you start to see how the mechanics work and how the different kind of actions work, you'll start to see all these really cool things, little kind of rules that thematically tie in together and really make sense. And the more you play the game, the more it becomes intuitive. And you're like, oh, of course this happens when I do that because this works with the theme of the game. And Lacerda's games are some of the most thematic Euros I've ever played. And they also integrate the theme into the mechanics in such a way that I've rarely seen before. So I love his games. Almost all of them have art by Ian O'Toole, who is amazing. He has a great design sense. So when he does the board art, the card art for games, he also does the graphic design. So everything just looks really good together. It's all kind of a piece. I mean, I'd be happy with a few Vital Lacerda games in my collection if that was the entirety of my collection. That's how good his games are. They also usually have very, very good solo modes, and this one is no exception. You're going to be playing against two AI players, one that's based on Vital Lacerda and one that's based on David Turksey, who designed the solo mode. So the solo game will see you facing off against those two AI players and still dealing with Sandra. And I've played the solo game. It's really good. Another thing that I really like about Kanban EV and Lacerda games in general is just the way that they flow. So there are kind of enough grab bags and mechanics in the game that you can adjust your strategy to some degree based on what's happening, what's working out for you and what isn't, and also what other players are doing. And I always like that in the game when you can kind of change your tactics and alter your strategies a little bit and make some adjustments. At the same time, there is kind of a grander design to Vital Lacerda games. And if you kind of find this flow and you learn to do certain things first and other things later and other things after that, you can chain things in Lacerda games in a way that gives you this flow to the game that is just very fulfilling and empowering. And you feel this engine building, and sort of one good turn leads into another good turn, leads into another good turn. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you kind of miss that. If players do something on a turn and kind of screw you up, you can get off your game, and it can be hard to get back on track a little bit. But I like that about the game. It's just that sometimes you might get in a groove and you might really be able to ride that groove. And other times you're going to have to make a lot more adjustments and kind of movements within your strategy. But whatever you're doing, making those adjustments and either kind of chasing that continued victory or chasing to try to get a leg up and try to get some victory out of what has become a challenging or losing situation. It's some of the most compelling games to me. It's some of the most fun games. So I'm actually working on a first impressions video for Kanban EV right now. The filming's already done. I just have to edit it. And it should be up over the weekend at latest. So be looking out for that, and you can hear more of my thoughts in detail. Now, that's all the games that I've played this period, which means that this video is coming to a very short end. So I had 5 Kickstarters for you that are funding in the last half of July for you to consider and maybe go take a look at, and some information on 5 games that I've played. Now, I do these videos, specifically these Kickstarter updates, twice a month, which means that the next one should be landing somewhere around the last Wednesday or Thursday of July. So that's Wednesday the 28th, Thursday the 29th, that's when you should see the video landing for the first couple weeks of August. Also next week, we'll see the publication of my June Game of the Month video. Very shortly after this video launches, you should see the first impressions video for Merv, the Heart of the Silk Road, and the first impressions video for Kanban EV. So once the Merv video and the Kanban EV video are published, that will catch me up on the games that were published in 2020. And then I have 8 games to catch up on in 2021. And you will see those videos get published over the next probably 3 weeks. So those first impressions videos that we'll be releasing are going to be for the following games. And I'm going to give these to you in the order that they will probably release. Kemet Blood and Sand, followed by Shawson and Embarcadero, and I think it's probably likely that you'll see those 3 videos come out next week. And then in the 2 to 3 weeks following that, you'll see videos for Import Export Definitive Edition, Hallertau, Praga Caput Regni, Oath, Chronicles of Empire and Exile, and Stronghold Undead. And then once those videos get published, so now we're into August, I will only be publishing first impressions videos on either Kickstarters that are delivering or retail games that I have just received that are fresh off the presses. So not older games, just brand new games that have just released. And I do have a few of those on the way, so that means the next batch of first impressions videos following those 8 games will be for Grand Austria Hotel, Tsukuyumi Full Moon Down, so those are 2 Kickstarters that are delivering. And then I already have some retail games on the way, which includes Imperium Classics and Imperium Legends. It also includes Beyond the Sun, so there's a very small chance I may try to do a first impressions video for Beyond the Sun. But once we hit August and I'm sort of caught up and current with first impressions videos, like I said, you will see them moving forward for newly delivered Kickstarters and newly released retail games. And then there's going to be a lot of new stuff coming to the channel, which I'll talk about more in future videos. But it's a lot of good stuff, and I'm really excited and looking forward to seeing how Think Outside the Board is going to be growing throughout the end of this year and into the next few years. So thank you very much for watching and being a part of this here at the beginning. If you want to help support me continue to make content like this and continue to grow the channel, then please give the video a like down below and subscribe if you want. Board games are a great way that we can continue to develop our minds. They help us learn how to multitask and juggle different systems simultaneously. And they're also a social thing, so they help us get out there and meet people. And all of those things are really important in this world as we move forward today. So keep growing, keep learning, keep meeting new people, keep helping each other, and keep playing lots of games. And be looking out for my next videos coming very soon. Merv, the Heart of the Silk Road First Impressions, and Kanban EV First Impressions. Have an awesome, awesome week. Peace out.